Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony, giving you the June 2025 overview. Forgive me if I sound a little bit nasally hoarse. Little egg allergy situation a couple days ago, still recovering from that. But in any case, wanted to go over the month of June. Some pretty significant things going on. Not a lot of things, but especially one significant thing that we'll talk about here. So here's the overview. Okay, we've got Jupiter entering Cancer June 9th. So that's, once every 12-year event that Jupiter will be in Cancer. We'll talk about that individually. The other one, going back to, my webinar I just did recently on the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries, that exact conjunction does not occur until February of 2026. But over the summer, starting on the same day that Jupiter enters Cancer on June 9th, for most of the summer, they will be within 1-degree orb. So basically flirting with this conjunction, which is a very major conjunction. Again, I'll put a link to the Saturn Neptune conjunction webinar in the bottom of this video if you want to check that out. It's a lot of great information, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that here today. We've got the full moon in Sag, which is an annual event that typically happens in June, sometimes in late May. But this one in particular is going to be interesting. You'll see when it comes to the moon's nodes, we're going to get a pretty nice grand cross going on there. Then we get to merge the first thing we talked about here, Jupiter in Cancer, with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So as soon as Jupiter enters Cancer, it's going to be starting a 1-degree orb with Saturn as far as the square goes, and it'll shortly follow that by squaring Neptune, which again, those two are within 1-degree orb of each other. So this period for most of June, you can see it's a chunk of June where Jupiter is squaring Saturn and Neptune within 1-degree orb at the same time as Saturn and Neptune are in their own 1-degree orb of conjunction. Okay, so very potent energy here, especially mid-June, plus or minus, that will carry out further as well. Then we have a solstice. This is an annual event, nothing super special here, but we'll mention it in passing. And then finally, the end of the month, just a few days after Jupiter starts to break up its 1-degree orb with Saturn and Neptune, we have a new moon that will pretty much join Jupiter within a degree or two and square that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So it'll take what wants to birth here in June and lay a platform for it going forward. And so we'll get to that all in order. So first things first, we got Jupiter in Cancer. Here's what it looks like. There's Jupiter, 0 degrees Cancer. Okay, just interesting. I'm highlighting a few things here because remember, the ruler of Cancer is the moon. And so here's where the moon is. And that moon happens to be in an aspect with Pluto here in a sextile. And so that is actually forming essentially a yod. Yod is when you have a sextile on one end, and then there's a planet in the middle of that opposite other end. So it's forming a quincunx 150-degree angle to both of these planets, the moon and Pluto, and while these form a sextile. So it's a very potent, known as the figure of God. That's the nickname for it in astrology. And so there's something about this entrance into Cancer for Jupiter that has a fatedness to it. Okay, and Jupiter in Cancer in general is very fertile. Okay, it's exalted in the sign of Cancer. This is Jupiter's favorite place to be. Jupiter in Cancer has a lot to do with kind of expanding on what we love, what makes our hearts light up. Okay, it expands on compassion, expands on nurturing. Okay, all these Cancer qualities. It's also, like I said, very fertile. So literally speaking, it can be a time when like families expand and things like that. But and another part of this, when it comes to the idea of tribes and groups, okay, there's a sense of a retribalism happening here in the coming months with Jupiter entering Cancer because of what we'll talk about here, the Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Aries, which has a lot to do with coming into our sovereignty. And so that can mean eliminating old tribal associations and like with our new essentially our new sense of self, how are we retribing? What is our new cast of characters in our lives as a result of coming into our sovereignty, for example? So anyway, that's the Jupiter end of things. Now we'll get into that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Again, it's not exact, but from early June to late August, 1-degree orb, pretty close to exact, warming us up for the February 20th, 2026 exact conjunction at 0 degrees Aries, which is incredibly significant. Again, webinar link will be in the description. So there's that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. This is essentially the same photo, just highlighting a couple different aspects in it, okay? So they're in the sign of Aries. Aries ruled by Mars. There's Mars in Leo. What is Mars doing? Well, it's forming a square to Uranus and a trine to Chiron, okay? And so this just kind of speaks to this idea of, okay, Saturn in Aries is basically saying, hey, now is the time. Now is the time to embody who we are in this life. And combined with Neptune, Neptune's kind of giving us this like more of a spiritual sense of, where we come from on that spiritual level, what our intentions are, our soul contract essentially, right? And Aries is saying, well, this is it. This is the place. This is the physicality through which we will fulfill that contract. And Saturn is coming in and saying, okay, what steps do we need to do to make that happen, right? The practicality. So Aries in general is very, gung-ho, fly off the handle, go now kind of energy. But with and Neptune can kind of amplify that a little bit. But Saturn's there to say, hey, let's really think this through. Let's really take the steps. Let's honor step 1 before we would think about step 2, right? So it's really trying to hone in that fire. Think of it like a controlled fire. It's like, we're not just going to light a fire in the forest. First, you gather your sticks together and you contain it. Then you light your fire and it's useful, right? So that's really what Saturn's purpose here is to make all that fiery energy, that sense of our soul saying, hey, now is the time, and saying, all right, well, let's make it real. Let's make it practical. It's been in our heads for so long. It's been in our hearts for so long. What can we do on a practical level to ensure that it happens? It's like if you have a business idea, like Saturn is like business plan, right? Just as an example. Okay, if you have this idea you want to make a move or something, Saturn says, well, what are your resources going to be to pay for the move, to then support you while you're there, etc. So it's making sure that our dreams are coming true because we're taking the steps to do so, right? And it's interesting because Mars is with that square to Uranus, which can be a little bit impulsive, okay? But the trine to Chiron in Aries, and Chiron's been in Aries since 2018, and so it's really been a lot of healing in making room for this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. So a lot of healing having to do with facing our perception of being capable, of being able to be sovereign and independent, not have to depend on others, etc. So what this is saying is, as long as we're taking those practical steps, our actions are going to align with this more healed version of ourselves, and we can hone in that impulsiveness. Okay, but what we do is going to change things forever at this point. So again, this very significant point in time. The last Saturn-Neptune conjunction was in Capricorn back in 1989. I talk all about that in the webinar. So these are, maybe twice in a lifetime kind of event. And the one in Aries is very significant on a personal level because Aries has to do with the individual, the self. Okay. So it's no longer like the previous cycle, which has been about like governments and corporations. That's the Capricorn energy being, setting the stage and setting the bar and directing things. This is where globalism comes from. And that we're seeing that on the verge of collapse here on a collective level and being replaced by more of a sense of individual sovereignty. And then going back to that Jupiter in Cancer, again, we're eliminating those in our environment that no longer jive with this new version of ourselves. And we're retribing with others that do, that can respect our boundaries, for example, that can function similar to the way that we do by having a sense of sovereign self and respecting others. Okay. So that's big stuff going on here. That takes us to the full moon in Sag. And then immediately after that, we'll talk about Jupiter's square to Saturn and Neptune and how those two things we just talked about come together. Okay. But it's full moon in Sag, 21 degrees Sagittarius. Very interesting chart. So there's the moon. Okay. There's the sun at their 20 degrees of Gemini and Sagittarius. And notice what's happening exactly squaring them pretty much within a couple degrees is the moon's nodes. We have the North Node in Pisces, South Node in Virgo. Okay. We also have a little grand trine. So it's that Mars Chiron trine that we saw in the Saturn-Neptune conjunction chart shows up here as part of a grand trine with this moon. So very potent energy with this full moon. the first thing that jumps out at me with this is some kind of like letter or communication or final word on something comes through. And this is happening on June 11th, which is right as Jupiter is starting to square the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Okay, so it's all happening all together, and the nodes are saying that there's kind of like, picking our direction, or at least picking our style toward how we head in that direction. Okay, and we're being asked to use more of our intuition, less of our worry energy. Okay, so we may not have all the answers. Again, Saturn wants us to get super practical. Sometimes the most practical thing is on the other side of some fear, that we're stuck in some fears and worries over here with South Node and Virgo, and our hearts and our intuition are screaming at us that like this is direction, based on this communication or whatever information comes in that changes things, that we should take that direction, and we can trust that Saturn has our back on the other side of that, right? That the practical things will come in. Okay, so sometimes we got to take a little bit of a leap to get even into, it's not a black and white thing where one side is practical, one side is impractical and taking a leap. It's like sometimes we have to take a leap to fall into what's practical. Okay, and sometimes we can be addicted to, like, say, an old form of our routine, old form of earning money, right? That's Virgo is going to be very particular with that, to say, "Ooh, but this is all I'm used to. This is all I know." So we might have this opportunity come through that forces us out of our known zone. So not just comfort zone, but just known zone, like something we just don't know, but that we can trust that will actually play itself out. And that trying to Mars Chiron just adds some support to that, the support to the idea that we can be confident taking action, and that we've healed a lot with Chiron approaching the end of Aries here. We've gone through a lot of healing the last several years in terms of self-confidence, in knowing that we're capable, knowing that we're, have the capacity to be independent, et cetera, all that stuff. So this calling, something that comes through here in the middle of the month, it might very well, be something to do with, pushing us into a place where we have to rely on ourselves a bit more, and so maybe like part of that habit, that South Node in Virgo, is the idea that, there's external sources of income and things like that, but now we've got to more drive it ourselves. Okay, but what this says is that if we trust our intuition and we do take those practical steps that we do have to take, that it can work out. Okay, we don't have to be stuck in the worries, stuck in the old. Okay, so this full moon's pretty exciting, and again, it happens right at the beginning of when this is occurring. So June 11th, it's pretty much right after Jupiter starts its square with Saturn, and right before it starts its square with Neptune. So we're going to take that all as one, since it's Jupiter in Cancer and this Saturn conjunction Neptune all in one. So very potent mid part of June. So this full moon happens, some surprise happens, and then we're dealing with this, in isolation here, but it's not actually happening in isolation. But what this is telling me, like with that whole fertility of Jupiter, in this expansion of kind of getting into like what feels good. Okay, Jupiter being exalted in Cancer, and that's clashing. Square is not easy energy. It's clashing with this new sense of grounding our ideal self into this life. So in association with that full moon, what comes through there and forces us to kind of trust ourselves a little bit. I think there could be some real potent opportunities that come in for some of us. Okay, and nothing's going to land completely all at once. Like life is not going to be completely different at the end of June than it is at the beginning of June. But the fertility, the fertilizer, essentially, that we're going to need to grow things steadily, along with Saturn into the future, might just come into our lives in the month of June. Suddenly we're like, oh, I see things I see things very clearly now. Oh, I see how this fits in now. Like this has always been like out over here onto the side for me, but now I can see how it could fit here. Okay, so there's a real expansion of awareness of like what we could be doing. Okay, how we could be making more money, how we can use our resources, our talents to, lay the foundation for, again, allowing for our true selves to actually exist in this life here with that. So it's a big, big energy here in mid-June. A lot could come in, but again, nothing is going to ground and, be present immediately. It is just the preview, just the fertilization. We still have to water it. We still have to harvest it when they, everything blooms and everything. But this is just like a douse of fertilizer into some healthy soil. Okay, very beginning stages of planting. So this is very, very big energy mid-month. Then solstice, we're going to mention it just because it's there. It happens every year. Just happens to be, in the midst of this just kind of energy. It'll be right at the tail end of Jupiter's square to both Saturn and Neptune this year. And just take a look at it. There's the sun entering Cancer. Just like we had Jupiter enter Cancer on June 9th. This is be June 20th. And just a little note, just because, again, Cancer is ruled by the moon. And here's the moon just entering Taurus right before the solstice. So it's going to be a nice little sextile there. Okay. And then we got Mars involved there too. Okay. I just find that kind of interesting. It's a nice little gentle triangle of energy. Sextile here, sextile there, trine here between the moon and Mars. It's got pleasant omen essentially for this solstice. That's all I'll say. But I'm not going to get too deep into that because I want to talk about what happens a couple days after that solstice, because that'll end our discussion here for the month of June. And that is when the sun is going to catch up to Jupiter, and then and the moon is going to catch up to both of them. We're going to have this new moon in Cancer that's going to bring this Mars to the forefront, which we'll see here. So here it is, final piece for this month, new moon in Cancer. Here's that chart. So like we said, Jupiter is just starting to pull off. This is June 25th. So it's just starting to pull off of the exact square to both Saturn and Neptune up there. But as it does, we've got sun and moon, nice little new moon within a degree of Jupiter and, within a couple of degrees of a square to Saturn, Neptune, while also forming a sextile to that Mars in Virgo that we saw in the previous chart. So this is basically saying, like, whatever pulses in mid-month with that full moon, with Jupiter squaring, Saturn and Neptune up there, whatever does come in, all that fertilizer. Now, this is the new moon that sets the foundation for, stepping forward toward the future with it. Okay. And with the sextile to Mars, there's an opportunity there to really take things step by step. So Mars in Virgo is really about, going through the list. Okay. If this is our end goal, what's the first thing we need to do to get there? What's the second thing we need to do? Third thing, etc. So not rushing the process. So it may rush into our lives, the awareness and everything else in mid-June, but the end of June, this new moon is saying, yes, we're doing this. Because it's with Jupiter squaring Saturn, Neptune. So the same energies that brought that into our lives, this new moon is saying, yeah, we're on board, but this is how we're doing it. Okay, we're going to set this foundation, and let's take our step by step to get there. And when we get to the point where we have the full moon in Cancer, and I'm not sure the exact date of that, I just know it's going to be right around the new year, right? That's when it always happens. It's when the sun is in Capricorn, we'll have a full moon in Cancer. I do know that Venus and Mars, who we just had recent retrogrades with, they will both be conjuncting the sun at the same time in early January. So it can be right around the same time of when this culminates. So there is something about what we've been building in the background over the last several months with the Venus and Mars retrogrades, and what we're setting the foundation for here in June, and then what could culminate here as we start 2026, which again is going to be just weeks before the exact conjunction of Saturn, Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, which makes a lot of sense. So don't think things have to move so fast, no matter how, expansive things come in this month and how excited we might get. Know that there are some steps we got to take, and that it will probably take till the end of this calendar year to maybe even see things in a starting position where we can work with it, right? So we're really just tilling the soil right now. And we can harvest some things at that time, and then it's time to figure out what to do with our harvest, right? Okay, so just a little review here. So we got Jupiter entering Cancer June 9th, almost immediately forming a square to both Saturn and Neptune, which are going to be in 1 degree orb from June 9th to August 23rd. This all happens in the midst of this very exciting full moon that squares the nodes and, forces us to trust ourselves. And then just after the solstice, the sun and moon will join Jupiter squaring Saturn and Neptune and Aries as well. And this is, again, setting that foundation heading to the future, with using the rest of this calendar year really as our lane, to keep our energy on and not thinking too many steps ahead. Okay, so that is that. Thank you for joining me. And if you are interested in that webinar on Saturn Neptune conjunction, that will be in the link below. Also, I'll put a link to my Facebook business page so you can follow for more posts, okay, down there as well. And you can also see my latest summer special on my Facebook post, and that is a significant amount off of my regular fee for readings. So I'm doing individual readings as well as my creating compatibility readings, which is basically 2 or more individuals involved. Creating compatibility is kind of my thing I want to go to more. But yeah, feel free to check that out. And if you have any questions, put them down below. Reach out to me if you were interested in your own personal reading and taking advantage of that summer special. And we will see you again next time. Take care.